Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started today. Thank you all so much for joining us for our May installment of the Sustainability Leadership Presentation Series titled Lessons from Nature, Learning to Thrive. Our presenters today are Daniel Lawse and Lily Livingston. Daniel is co-owner and chief century thinker at Veritas Group, a sustainability consulting firm in Omaha. Daniel exemplifies biomimicry leadership every day by engaging organizations to evolve their business approach to one that supports people in their well-being, heals the earth, and allows their operations to flourish for generations to come. Daniel has studied nature, systems, and the human desire to be both professionally and personally fulfilled. With over a decade of training and experience in leadership in the environment, Daniel brings humans and nature together to inspire and empower people and organizations to co-create a sustainable world where they can thrive. Lily is an architect and sustainable design project manager for HDR's Sustainable Design Services team with over 20 years of experience. In late 2013, Lily transferred to HDR's corporate headquarters in Omaha after working in the San Francisco Bay Area for over 18 years, with 5 of those years in HDR's San Francisco office. Lily chairs the USGBC Nebraska Flatwater Chapter Board of Directors. She speaks and teaches widely on sustainable design, including internal courses at HDR and externally. During this presentation, should you have questions, please use the chat box on the right of your screen or the hashtag SLPS Thursday via Twitter. If your question does not get answered during the presentation, the final 10 minutes or so will be reserved for Q&A. Again, that's hashtag SLPS Thursday on Twitter or the chat box to the right of your screen. And at this point, I'd like to let everyone know that this is going to be a very interactive presentation, so please have your cell phones ready for answering some questions from Daniel and Lily. So at this point, I will turn it over to them.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And thanks to Central Community College, Waste Cap Nebraska, Joslin Institute for Sustainable Communities, and MCC for hosting the SLPS Thursdays every month during the academic year. It's a fantastic resource for the community. Before we go into it, I just want to give you a brief overview of how we're going to do this. So I'm going to talk briefly, 15-20 minutes about biomimicry. Then we're going to do an activity about biomimicry so you can really experience and learn and get your hands dirty a little bit. Then Lily's going to talk for 15 or 20 minutes on biophilic design, and then she's going to have an activity as well. We're open to questions throughout, during the activity, during the presentation, but we're also going to dedicate some time at the end for any discussion or Q&A. So, without further ado, I would like to know a few things about you in the audience, because we're going to start this presentation the same way nature communicates. So, nature works well when they identify what the receiver is and the signal. So the signal and the receiver evolved over time to match very well each other. And so when a signal gets sent, the receiver hears it clearly and the response is there. So we're going to do some real-time feedback. If you could text with your phone, Daniel Lawse 560 to the number 22333, that's 2 2s and 3 3s, you'll get logged into this session, and then we have a few interactive questions throughout the presentation that you can just respond to those answers. So if you're able to do that, I'll give you a minute to do that, and then you can see the list over on the right side of your screen as a few examples, but text one word at a time. You can text more than one word, but just do one word at a time about who you are, your background, your profession, where you're from, anything that describes you. And just take about 30 seconds to do that. And as you're doing this, what it's going to allow us to do is understand who our audience is, our receiver, if you will, if we were talking in biological terms. And one of the things that Lily and I can do now is modify the presentation and make it more specific so we're meeting the needs of who's in the audience. And if you think about it, in your communications in your work or in your family, if you are the one who has a message to send, it's your responsibility to understand what the antenna is that you're sending to. In the work world, some people would like to receive phone calls. Some people like to receive emails. Others prefer Facebook. Others really like in person. So if you have an important message to send, it works really well, and this is how nature does it, if your message meets that receiver's antenna. So on any given day, I'm emailing people who I know are on email or Facebooking people who I know are on Facebook more. And so just learning from nature, that's one of the things that how nature communicates with the signal and the receiver and the antenna, and then ultimately a response. So we've got a few things coming up. We'll give you another 30 seconds or so because maybe a few people are having a hard time logging in to just join the session. Once you join the session once, you won't have to do the Daniel Lawse 560 again. Yes?
A little memo came up saying this may charge your account. You know,
I guess if you don't have texting on your
I
account,
do have texting. That's why I thought it was.
I just said yes. It's usually from the organization.
Okay.
But I've never
It
been
won't
charged.
charge you, right?
I have
yeah,
never been.
it's if you have free or if you pay for a texting plan on your phone, it's not going
Then it
to
won't.
charge you unless
Okay.
you're surpassing your text messages. In the month.
Gotcha.
Well, we'll leave this up. We'll leave this poll open for a few more seconds, and you can continue to text some things in, and we can go back and look at it if we want, or Lily and I can just glance at it while we're continuing. So the next thing we'd like to do to better understand who's in the audience is another poll, and again, one word at a time, so it turns into a word cloud. How would you define sustainability? And you can respond as many times as you want, but just do it one word at a time, if you would, please. Hyphenated words work too. And if you're virtual, this is the great thing about this. You can join in. All you need is a smartphone or a cell phone that has texting. So if you're sitting at your computer at your desk, or if you're at one of the remote locations across Nebraska or a viewing area in Omaha, go ahead and take out your cell phone and text if you want to join in. This real-time feedback. Because as you'll learn, nature likes short, simple feedback loops. It allows nature and us as humans to respond more promptly and directly. And if you see a word you like, you can repeat it. So I'll read a few of these. How would you define sustainability? Impactful, ecology, crucial, preserving, interconnected, systems thinking, holistic, health, vital, loving, life-giving, ecology, holistic. Everybody stopped because it looks so pretty like that.
It's fun to see. So as you'll see, the words that are getting larger are the ones we're getting multiples of. And that shows the strength of the sort of voting, if you will, on different words that are randomly happening in our audience, online and in the room here. Crucial, restorative, and impactful. I like that. Yes to all of the above. The reason we asked you to think about how you define sustainability is it is a very huge spectrum. It's a huge umbrella word. It's a word we use a lot in different avenues of our lives, our industries, at home, at work. And those of you in this room are probably already passionate about it in some degree and online. But what's helpful is to kind of understand, what do we mean when we say sustainability, or what do we mean when we say nature, when we talk about it later. There is one definition that came up in the late 80s from the Brundtland Commission, and it talks about the future generations. What do we do now that impacts our future generations, allows us to sustain life moving forward? It's very straightforward, very good definition, solid definition. There's some new definitions that are emerging. This is a long quote, but I want to read it to you. The standard for ecological design is neither efficiency nor productivity, but health, beginning with that of the soil and extending upward through plants, animals, and people. It is impossible to impair health at any level without affecting it at other levels. The etymology of the word health reveals its connection to other words such as healing, wholeness, and holy. Ecological design is an art by which we aim to restore and maintain the wholeness of the entire fabric of life, increasingly fragmented by specialization, scientific reductionism, and bureaucratic division. The reason I think this is such an amazing quote is it gets to the heart of what we're going to be talking about here, this idea of working within ecosystems, realizing we're ecosystems, designing ecosystems, or even making problems shift and change and grow and looking at opportunities in a systematic way. It's a whole paradigm of thinking when you think about sustainability in that whole holistic perspective, which I saw a lot of those words in your definitions. This is a spectrum that I wanted to present as a context and the backdrop as we move forward talking about biomimicry and biophilic design. When you think about sustainability, oftentimes we talk about doing less harm. We're going to be more efficient. We're going to conserve more resources. So conservation and efficiency, very important starting points. That's doing less harm. That's improving on conventional methods. What we're going to be really describing here is moving towards the top of this spectrum. So sustainability, a lot of people are looking at as the 0 point here. You might have heard of the term net zero or other ideas that are about carbon neutrality. There's a lot of words, buzzwords out in the industry today, but what that basically means is what you put in and what you put out starts to balance out. So that whether you're talking about a building or you're talking about how you're operating your schools or different things that you're doing in your world at home or at work, you're trying to create a 0 point. So you're trying to do no harm, kind of like the doctor's credo. And then above that is this idea of restoring, reconciling, regenerating, doing better. So biomimicry and biophilic design and what we're trying to present as an idea here and a new way of thinking is really starting to aim us towards the top of the spectrum, knowing that we have to start down here, but we're really moving upwards in our thinking past just doing no harm to let's do better. And I will pass this over to Daniel to start with biomimicry.
Thank you, Lily. And we recognize that you're just going to get a taste of biomimicry and biophilic design today because there's no way we can cover it in 15 minutes. So we hope that you leave curious and wanting more, and we're happy to talk more afterwards. So what is biomimicry? It has a very specific definition with very consciously chosen words. It is the conscious emulation of life's genius. Conscious because it's intentional. It's not just an accidental, oh, we designed something really well, and oh, by the way, it mimics one of these things in nature. We intentionally go about saying, how does nature do this? Nature's evolved over billions of years. It's a glorious creation that we can learn from and a gift. And so how can we consciously learn from nature as a mentor? Emulation is different than copying. We're not trying to recreate the owl and make some robotic owl to do silent flight or to have feathers that zip together, open and close silently, and also you can just, like a fabric. Imagine if we could design a fabric that would just open and close. We're not trying to recreate the owl, but we're trying to emulate it. We're trying to pick up the key design principles that nature uses and then apply them to the human challenges that we have right in front of us today. And nature's genius is just this idea that there's 30 million species that we know about on planet Earth. A lot of biologists and scientists think there might be as many as 100 million that we just haven't identified or don't know about. And they have been practicing locally adaptive solutions to wherever they are. You're not going to find the prairie grass that you find in the Midwest in the deserts of the Southwest. You're not going to find the trees and the mountaintops that you find down in Florida. So these natural organisms have adapted very well to where they were, where they grow, and where they live. So how can we learn from animals in the desert how to conserve water? Because they've been doing it for a long time, and they've perfected some things, and they've grown to find ways to survive and even thrive in nature. So the other way I like to think of biomimicry is, who thinks Google is pretty innovative? Or maybe Apple. General Electric has been around quite a while. But The longest running research and development laboratory on planet Earth is nature itself. So why wouldn't we borrow from this free R&D lab? I mean, Google, Apple, they pour billions and billions of dollars a year into R&D to develop the next new product. So why wouldn't we go get some of this free R&D from nature itself? But it takes some practice, and there's some good ways to do that. Biomimicry has helped kind of put into a lens or a process so that we can ask nature some of these questions and very specifically, intentionally help out the human challenges we face. There's three main ways to look at nature. You can look at nature's form, which again is that owl feather, and how does it fly silently? It's because at the end of the feathers there's all these little micro hairs that when they flap their wings it's silent. So we can mimic that or emulate that on a high-speed rail design to silence the parts of the train that make a lot of noise, which allows the train to go faster, not create sonic booms through tunnels. We could also mimic the process or emulate the process, which an owl creates these feathers at room temperature. They self-assemble. There's no toxic chemicals going into the process of manufacturing these feathers, and there's no toxic chemicals as an outcome or a waste product of these. Imagine if we developed a process to make these chairs or buildings that didn't require any toxic chemicals, didn't require high pressure, high heat manufacturing processes. They were all low energy, and they self-assembled. Nature does it. We should be able to get there. And then the last way that we can learn from nature is from a system standpoint. These owl feathers don't exist except for they are on an owl. And the owl doesn't exist except for it's in a forest, which is an ecosystem, which is in a region. And there's different owls in different regions. And those regions exist on this planet Earth. And so if we look at any one of these individual components, we can do some pretty cool things. But if we put them all together, we can do amazing things. If we just took the form of the owl feather and used it for destroying life on Earth, whether that's natural life or human life, then that misses the whole point of biomimicry. It misses the whole point that we are in a system. And the Earth as a system is restorative. It is regenerative. Yes, there's death and destruction in nature, but as a whole, it's a restorative process systematically. So anything that mimics nature and is destructive is not truly practicing biomimicry. And I like this quote from Janine Benyus. She's one of the co-founders of Biomimicry. Creating conditions conducive to life, it's not an option. It's a rite of passage for any organism that manages to fit in here over the long haul. So if we care about humans fitting in here over the long haul, we don't have any other option other than to figure out how to do it in a way that we can survive and even thrive. And nature's been doing this in a lot of different biological regions and ecosystems for billions of years. So let's learn from that. So we can use nature as model, measure, and mentor. Model is, what would nature do here? Let's say we want to communicate better in our departments. I've heard large organizations sometimes have challenges with communication. So let's go ask nature, how does nature communicate? Then measure is, how doesn't nature communicate? So we can look at what works well in nature and what nature doesn't do in our instance. And then as a mentor is the why or why not. Why does nature do it this way? And I'll get into a few specific examples. Or why doesn't nature do it the way that we've been doing it for a while and failing miserably? Maybe we can learn from that. So over the last 2 decades, biomimicry has been putting together these life principles, which are universal life principles that apply across 99% of all life that's existing today. And just to put this R&D laboratory into perspective a little bit more, 99.9% of all life that has ever existed on planet Earth no longer exists. It's all extinct. So if you think about the experimentation that's occurred over this period of time, the things that are here today, human beings, the animals and plants that are here today, have gone through some pretty rigorous lab testing. Most labs, like Apple and Google, they'll put out products that have an 80% success rate. 80% of their experiments have failed, at least 20% are working. Life has eliminated 99.9% of the solutions that don't work, and we're part of the solution that does work, at least right now. So these are some key life principles, and then underneath each one there's a lot of others that kind of elaborate, because these are kind of generalized. The trick becomes, how do we learn from these life principles and apply them to our challenge? And there's a questioning process of going back to that mentor. Let's go ask nature how nature does it. How does the R&D lab that's been going for billions of years solve these questions, solve these problems? I don't expect you to read this, but I just want to show you the thought that's gone into these life principles. And I don't have time to go into all of them, but I'm going to pick a few of them and really dig into them. So I'll just read the top 6, which are the core life principles. It's evolving to survive, which is continually incorporating and embodying information to ensure enduring performance. Who doesn't want to survive? In fact, I think most people I've talked to say they want to thrive. Adapt to changing conditions is a second life principle. This is appropriately responding to dynamic contexts. The only constant thing in life is change. So how do we adapt to that well? Being locally attuned and responsive. This is about fitting into and integrating with the surrounding environment. It's about where you live. It's about where you work. It's about the environment, everything from the soil to the plants to the animals to the people and the human organizations. Nature integrates development with growth. It doesn't just grow wildly without having some sort of development, whether that's the physical structural development or whether it's a network development of community. How can we learn from that? And being resource efficient, both material and energy. Think of sharks for a second. They swim around all the time. There's some sharks that they can't stop swimming, otherwise they don't get the oxygen flowing over their gills and they'll die. So nature in the ocean doesn't want to spend a lot of energy moving around, especially if you have to move around your entire life. So over lots of years of evolution, the shark has become very streamlined, and we've now learned from shark skin how to add dentricles to the hulls of our ships that create even less drag in the water. So we have taken a very physical form and applied it to our ships, so our ships are becoming more energy efficient. They don't use as much fuel. That same ventricle pattern also is resistant to bacteria growing on it, just because it's inhospitable physically. So they're now putting this ventricle pattern in hospitals, so they're not having to use as many antibiotics and therefore not creating as many superbacteria. So that's just a really specific physical example. And the last main life principle is using life-friendly chemistry. Use chemistry that supports life processes. Nature basically does chemistry in water. And if you think about all of the chemicals that we have in our water, because we put them there, all the chemicals in our R&D labs, there's a lot of toxic substances, and we have whole government organizations that are supposed to test these things for safety for humans. Nature doesn't really have that problem. They use a core set of elements, non-toxic materials primarily, and they do a lot of their chemistry in water. And their waste products then don't pollute. So one that I want to drill into is cultivating cooperative relationships. I had the opportunity 2 weeks ago to spend time with some giant redwoods. And these trees, the big ones, the old ones, are called legacy trees or monarchs. And some of them can be as old as 2,500 years old. That's kind of old. And luckily, some of them haven't been cut down. But these giant redwood trees, the tallest one is 350 feet tall, have a root system that only extends out 50 feet. So imagine the proportions of that. How in the world does it grow so tall without falling over? You'll never find those giant trees standing alone. The only way it grows to that height and magnitude is with the other trees. They interweave and interlock their roots together. So it's because of community that we have some of the oldest living biological life on the planet. Not because of competition and fighting, but because of community. Not only do they interlock their roots together, actually I'll go over to that in a second. Not only do they interlock their roots together using a fungal network called mycorrhiza, which you may have seen this even in a forest here in Nebraska. You lift up a rock or a decaying piece of bark, it's that kind of white mesh, it's fungus. The fungus connects the roots together and they share resources. So the fungus provides water and phosphorus to the roots, and the tree provides carbon to the mycorrhiza. So it's this mutualistic, positive relationship. They're exchanging goods that are different. So how can we apply that to our interactions as organizations, as human beings, within our departments, within our families? And the amazing thing that research has just recently discovered is that trees, if a tree gets hurt, if it's a tree in trauma, meaning a limb got broken off in a storm, or a human came and chopped part of it off or cut it down, these trees will send nutrients from the healthy trees through the fungal network to this tree in trauma to help it out. Who knew that trees were out there helping each other out when they get hurt? We now know this for a fact. And it's because of this network and connection and community that's developed over time that they're able to do that. I want to talk a little bit more about this Because another aspect of these cooperative relationships is when one of these trees dies, let's say it was a 2,000-year-old tree, you know, middle-aged, late middle-aged for a redwood, and it dies, it gives back to the forest for 5 times the length of its life. So for 10,000 years, longer, it was alive for 2,000, now for the next 10,000 years, it's giving back to the forest through the decomposition and rebuilding the soil, providing habitat for other plants and animals. Just on the top of these trees when they're alive, there's over 200 different plant species that are growing on this tree. Different lichens and mosses and fungus. You know, soil, like things break down in these giant branches and you have your own little micro ecosystems in these trees. So when they fall down, they're creating all this other habitat. They're giving back to the soil. They're bringing in other animals and plants because of what they're doing. And for 10,000 years, these trees are giving back. Imagine what we could do as humans if when an organization went away or a human went away, they were still giving back in their legacy. There's a lot more about how nature does cooperative relationships, but I'm running out of time. So I kind of asked, this is a picture of downtown San Francisco, how do we mimic a redwood forest? If we really want to be in this thing called life and sharing in an economy and an environment and community for the long haul, maybe we should look more to the redwood forest and how they do it instead of the short-lived organisms on life. Because there's different phases of, or stages of ecosystems, the short-lived competitive ones to the longer-lived communal ones. But if you don't want to live a long life, I guess you can look at some of the short-lived organisms for some models. So this goes back to the cell phone technology, which doesn't work for everybody who doesn't have a cell phone for texting, but it does work. It helped us out a little bit by hearing some of the definitions of sustainability and hearing a little bit about where you're coming from. So in nature, they use short, simple feedback loops, and this allows them to use cyclic information to modify a reaction appropriately. Ants do this really simple thing. They go out and look for food. When they walk out, they're dropping pheromone trail. If they find food, they come back on the same trail. So now there's 2 layers of pheromones there. Another ant comes along, says, oh, this one's double what mine is, or this one over here. I'm going to follow this one and see if there's something really there. It goes, so now there's 3 layers. It comes back, now there's 4. So all of a sudden, all these ants are going along these trails. If you've ever seen the trail of ants in your house, they're following the pheromone trail, and every ant that walks that path makes it stronger and generates or attracts more ants to it. Very simple, very instantaneous. The ant hits the trail and it knows this one's a strong one, this one's not, I'm going to go this way. So what we did is we used a little bit of this short, simple feedback loop to modify appropriately our presentation. By hearing how you define sustainability, Lily was able to speak better to that. Modifying some of these examples as I go through here. So think about in your life, in your department or in your home or in your neighborhood, how do you take advantage of these cyclic feedback loops? And with technology today and the massive amounts of data, it's getting easier and easier to leverage these cyclic feedback loops. And then we can respond and change our behavior in appropriate ways. And another key one that I want to the last one I'll hit on is self-organization. So creating conditions that allow components to interact in concert to move toward an enriched system. How many people have seen birds collide when they're flocking? Or fish collide when they're, I don't know what it's called, when they're swimming in schools? It doesn't really happen. And they're not far apart. So at this biomimicry workshop I was at a couple weeks ago, we had the opportunity on the beach to try to be a flock of birds. I wasn't the flock of birds, I was in the school of fish. And we were told, self-organize. So us human beings are trying to be all clever. What rules should we set up so that I stay equidistant away from Gary and Heather and I don't collide into them? And we went through this and we tried and we swarmed a little, or we schooled around a little bit on the beach, and it didn't work. We were trying to be too complicated. Ultimately what worked was just maintain contact with your neighbor. We tried to assign, if this person is in this position, they're the leader, so follow them if they turn one way or the other way. And then we had somebody else who was pretending to be a bird or a shark coming through us, and we'd have to separate out and come back together. And it came down for us to just that one simple rule: maintain some slight contact with your neighbor. And if you went off one way, just come back if you're the lone fish. And sometimes that happens in a school of fish. One guy veers this way, and sometimes everybody follows, and other times it veers off. It's like, oh, going this way. Fish have these sensors on the sides of their bodies, so they're able to actually do that. birds flock with the ability, they do something, the research is showing that they somehow have a sense of a certain number of neighbors around them, and they always maintain that number in a certain way. And they also have done research that birds can tell distance with the eyes that are more on the sides of their head instead of frontal like ours are. And the faster something is moving, the closer it is. The slower something is moving, the further away it is. And so if it's a different speed on each side, each eye is getting a different speed, it's going to turn one way or the other to try to get that even speed. So that's how it knows that Gary turned this way, so I'm going to go this way because he's getting slower over here and everything else is fast on this side. So it's just this idea that there's no leaders in a flock of birds. There's no leaders in a school of fish. How do we create organizations that are not so hierarchical? In nature, there's basically 2 levels of hierarchy. If you look to try to find hierarchy in nature, it's 2 levels. And that doesn't always translate directly to human design. So this is where humans have to be translators. Because maybe we should be like a beehive. That'd be great. They're really smart. They get along. And I'll be the queen. And it doesn't work that way, but there's aspects of how these communicate. It's, again, extracting those principles about how nature does it. It's not copying exactly how nature does it and applying it to the challenges that we face as humans. So now you get to play with some of these life principles, and I know this is a lot, but I trust that you're all competent, capable, and fun people willing to take a risk, otherwise you wouldn't have shown up today. And I want you to, again, text your answer, and if you don't have a phone, just think about what your answer is, because we'll kind of bring these all together and pick 2 or 3 that we'll then work on together. So the question is, what's one part of your life where you would like to thrive more? And the more specific you can be, the better. Yeah, so if you haven't joined the texting session, text Daniel Lawse 560 to the number 22333, and you'll get a response saying that you've joined. And then you can text your response, and this can be a full sentence, it doesn't have to be one word. And they'll start to populate in a few minutes. And when I ask to be specific, this is like, maybe it's a specific relationship with someone in your life, like a parent to child. Maybe it's about communication. Maybe it's about time management. But the more specific you can be, the easier it's going to be to ask nature, how does nature do it? Or how does nature not do this? And why? You can also share these in the Twitter feed if you don't have a cell phone but you have a computer, and our wonderful MCC hosts will type them in. I just
Also do it at the wholenev.com address instead of through.
Oh yeah, you can also be online at thepollev.com with the Daniel Lawse 560, thank you. And you can respond that way. So for those of you who don't have the screen right in front of you, maybe I'll read some of these. Activities, community, achieving goals, self-promotion, socializing, making more time to get outside and work, listening and leading from the heart, not the head, becoming more confident. We'll give a couple minutes for this because I want you to be thoughtful and give you time to respond. And then we're going to do something with all this. Self-sufficiency, convert my entire backyard to a food source, developing closer relationships, trusting my instincts, living in contentment. These are great. You guys have a couple hours? Nature's got answers for all of these. Motivation to accomplish. Volunteering. finishing what I start, more time in nature with friends and family, raising the next generation to be mindful and present. The ability to truly help others, believing that I can do it. So keep these coming in. I'm going to look at these and kind of group a few together so that we can enter into this activity for the next 7 to 10 minutes. So there's a lot about relationships, whether it's community or socializing or volunteering. There's a lot about, I would say, confidence maybe, self-promotion, being more confident, believing I can do it, finishing what I start, living in contentment might fall into that. So what I'd like you to do is, if you're in a room with other people, turn to one other person, so partner up, and pick. Time management is one, making a positive impact on the planet, and pick one of these three that I'm going to share, that I'm trying to summarize some of these so that it's not overwhelming. How does nature enter into relationships and maintain them and help those relationships thrive? And I'm going to put up the life principles slide so you can look at, see what some of the best practices are, and then think of examples in your own life where you've seen nature doing these things. Or think of an example where you think nature's doing something and find a life principle that works with it. So relationships is one area. I'm going to say confidence. How is nature confident or focused on a personal mission? Let's call it that. And see if you can do anything like with that. How does nature focus and get things done and have confidence? And the third one that is coming up a lot, work-life balance. There were a few on time. So let's ask nature, how does nature manage time? So pick a partner and ask one of those questions, give it some thought and discussion. How does nature manage time? How does nature enter into nurturing and thriving relationships? And the third one was, I just forgot. Oh, how is nature confident? Or how does nature have a personal mission to get things done and follow through? And you can start discussing. I'm going to leave this up for another minute, and then I'll flip to the slide so you can look at all the life principles.
How else is the intention?
So maybe the group that's looking at confidence can do intentionality or mindfulness. That's coming up a lot. If you have any questions or feedback and you're on Twitter, feel free to type those in now. Hashtag SLPS Thursday.
Like when you said like the cluster hunting, it doesn't leave for a specific time.
not anymore.
Yeah.
And so then it's regenerating and getting back to it.
Yeah, and I started really figuring out about until the next year. I was just come on. Yeah.
It doesn't mean there aren't any obstacles.
I know this isn't nearly enough time, but go ahead and finish your thoughts, and then hopefully a few of you are willing to either share in person via the microphone or type in a sentence or two about your conversation on Twitter or the chat box.
It's like perfectly self-sufficient.
Okay, I love the great conversation I'm hearing at MCC. I'd like to wrap it up so that we can move on to Lily's presentation. And does anybody here in the audience want to share a couple words about what you discussed? Or does anybody want to share via the chat box or on Twitter? How does nature nurture relationships? How does nature manage time? And how does nature do confidence or intentionality and purpose? Anybody here want to share? I'm going to have you speak into the microphone so people at the remote locations can hear.
The whole nature ecosystem is so connected to each other, and I've seen situations where you pull one thing out of the middle and it doesn't happen right away, but over a period of time that whole system collapses. And when we decide that we don't like insects, we put a whole bunch of insecticides on, kill off the insects, and the bird population drops, and then the insect population increases again, so we got to put more insecticide because we've got less birds, and you get this terrible cycle. And if we would have just left the darn thing alone, the relationship would have balanced out, but we had to get our own nose in it and screw it up.
So how does that relate to how you relate to other people, or how can we as humans learn from that example? That's a great example. If you pull a key species out.
Well, one of the key species I would think was that the first time we start saying those people are my problem. This is why our country is falling apart, because of those species. Let's pull them out. That group of people, let's pull them out from away. Then we fall apart.
Right. That's a great example. Nature loves biodiversity. It makes us more resilient. In fact, adapting to changing conditions, you incorporate diversity by including multiple forms, processes, or systems to meet a functional need. The more singular a system is, the more likely it is to collapse. Is anything coming online in the chat box? Or does anybody else in the audience here want to share?
The thing that comes up for me as a human being, I have a hell of a lot more distractions than nature does. How do they, I'm asking you, how do they pay it, it's an attention. I mean, so many people brought up presence and feeling another person or, so help.
I love it. So the question is, how does nature deal with distraction, right? And filter out, because you have so much distraction in your life. I'm still learning. I have a lot of distraction in my life, but the way nature does it, and this is a high-level summary without like going into every single species, is they finely hone their antennas to know what's most important to them and their own survival and thriving. And if you tune your antenna in, and actually I'm going to take a step back because this gets to the confidence and the intentionality piece. So we all have this thing called DNA, right? There's core DNA, which is every dog has a certain set of core DNA. And then every dog has different things that make it have a longer tail or shorter hair or floppy ears or pointy ears. or different colored eyes. Humans are the same thing. We all have core DNA. What is your core DNA? What is your core purpose in life? And if you know that, then you can tune your antenna to all that that is and focus on that, and then you'll pick up the right messages around you. You'll pick up the important signals that are coming into your life, and you can ignore all the noise. Because I tell you what, if every bird paid attention to all the noises around it, it wouldn't be able to find the insects. It tunes into the insects that it eats, and it hears those literally on a hearing basis. And it goes, how does a robin hear an earthworm in the ground? When there's wind blowing through the breeze, there's people talking at the park, dogs barking. So know your core purpose, know your core DNA, and then tune your antenna to find those signals. That's an oversimplification, but also, like, a bird is designed to be a bird. It's going to be a bird, and it's going to be the best bird that it can be. And one of the things that came up on the feedback was not taking things personally in relationships. I have yet to find, and I'm no expert completely, but I have yet to find in nature animals or plants taking things personally. It's really this feedback. Feedback is a neutral thing, and then we as humans attach a lot of different emotions to it. And emotions are even this neutral feedback thing. Emotion is a source of information for me. If I'm angry, I care deeply about something, and something just happened that brought that to my attention. So how do we learn to take feedback as this neutral thing? And it's really hard at work. It's really hard in families. But the more we can practice listening to the signals of what this feedback is telling us, the better we can choose an intentional response.
I saw confidence and belief in oneself a lot in the concepts that were being texted in. And I had this great image I was sharing with a friend recently that we do a lot of comparing as humans, and we do a lot of comparing in a very critical way. You would never ever go up to an oak tree and say, you know what, why aren't you a bamboo? I mean, come on. And you wouldn't go up to a bamboo tree and go, you know, you're really not an oak tree. You are what you are. And so it's this idea that if that's kind of an abstract concept, but I think that nature does not compare. Nature does not criticize. Nature has a lot of neutrality and just a lot of good information and signals, signals back and forth.
And to that point, nature's going to respond. If there's a life-threatening situation, nature's going to try to get out of it because nature wants to survive. That species wants to survive. So all these feedbacks, it's not really comparing, but there is feedback that gets taken. And this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to Lily. On the core DNA piece, there's genotypes and phenotypes. This is biology, 201 maybe. And the genotype is what is common no matter what. And the phenotype is what gets expressed based on the environmental conditions. So humans who live in certain parts of the world are adjusted to the heat better than humans who live in the Midwest. That's the phenotype being expressed. So you need to know your core, and then you also need to listen to the context of where you're at. Where do you live? Who are the people that you interact with? Is it a healthy and life-giving environment, or is it something that maybe you need to go plant yourself in more fertile soil? And an environment that's going to turn on more aspects of your phenotype that are healthy and life-giving to you. So that's just a direct translation, and there's all sorts of really nerdy and awesome biologists who can talk to you for days and weeks about DNA and genotypes and phenotypes. But this is what biomimicry can bring to us on a kind of social innovation side. How do human systems interact? How do human beings interact? So hopefully that provides a nice lens of biomimicry. I know it's just touching the tip of the iceberg. Love to talk more, but it's time for Lily to talk to us about biophilic design.
I will be doing some generous referencing back to what we just discussed. You're going to see a lot of overlap in the thinking, and I love your segue of genotype and phenotype, because we'll be talking about phenotypes in just a minute. But whereas biomimicry is getting us to look at how do we mimic and emulate nature, there's a lot of that goes on in biophilic design. Biophilic design is often really about the phenotype, the expression, the built environment, the houses that you live in, the offices that you go to work in, your outdoor classrooms, your indoor classrooms. So this idea of we as humans on the planet and the reality that we've created right now are indoors about 90 to 95% of the time. So a lot of the concepts that we were talking about when we were doing the biomimicry exercise were looking at these ideas of where in life can we thrive more, and what are those things. Biophilic design is going to be diving a lot of our reality into those indoor spaces you're spending 90 to 95% of your time in. And what are they like for you, and how can we maybe think about them differently and change them in a way that works with nature rather than thinks of us in the old idea of us being separate from nature, or our building sits on nature. What if our building was nature? What if we are nature? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And this is actually a local chapel, for those who know it, and I love this image because in terms of a biomimic, you know, there's an emulation of being in the forest and the repetition of the wood. And then when you're inside that building, you can see outside, you can get the dynamic about amounts of light. I don't know about operable windows, I have not visited it yet, it's on my to-do list, but there's this sense of connecting up with the things that make us feel good. When we talk about sustainability, and we're talking about the built environment, we talk about the places that we live and work. A lot of these things are categories that we try to organize our thoughts around. They all connect to each other. There's no way you can talk about one without talking about another. But sometimes as humans, we need to start somewhere. We need to create categories and we need to focus in. So you might be familiar with ideas of the community collaborating, integrating our ideas, thinking as a system, as people. Location and transportation, how do we get where we're going to go? Where are we located? Is it conducive to getting where we need to go fast, or is there just really bad freeway noise, or a lot of pollution around our house or home or building? How sustainable are we treating our garden, our sites, our landscape? What are we doing around the building, on the building, outside? Energy and water, very familiar topics when we talk about sustainability. Resources in, resources out, how we build those places, how we deconstruct them, what are we putting in them, the green chemicals and safer chemistry that we were talking about in biomimicry. Human health, which is connected to all those things. How do we experience the space? And then outreach and operations really kind of comes to, you can come up with the best ideas on the sustainable spectrum across these categories, but if people don't, from a behavior perspective, know what to do in that space, they don't know where to put the recycling, or they don't know issues around water, that if you pull the thing up in the low flow toilet, it's for number 1, and if you push it down, it's for number 2, you need a big sign, you know. You don't know, you can't know how to operate it or make it work right, so those are all important things. Building on that, biophilic design is really about a new way of looking at all those kind of contexts, but really from a very different lens. This idea that, what if we saw the world of one big relationship between ourselves and all of life? So it kind of is, biophilic, if you break down the word, it literally means love of nature. So it's really about a roadmap to health. It's about a new framework for relating our human biological science, our genotypes, our phenotypes, the way that we are built innately over those 3.8 billion years of R&D, and connecting it with nature and promoting health in our built environment. So let's define nature. Views of nature, natural, wild, and beautiful vary greatly. I might say nature, and you might say nature, just like we're talking about sustainability, and it might be two different things. There is a view that's pretty narrow. That's this idea that nature is only that which can be classified as a living organism, unaffected by our human impacts on the environment. So it would exclude you, the sun and the moon, your pet fish Nemo, home gardens, urban parks, and billions of living organisms that make up the biome of the human gut that's right now inside your stomach. So that would not be considered nature in this narrow view. A wider view is nature's everything. Very, very wide view. Including all that humans design and make is natural and part of nature because they are each extensions of our phenotype, a composite of an organism's observable characteristics or traits, the expressions that Daniel was talking about earlier. So this could include you, paperback books, plastic chairs, swimming pools, asphalt roadways. People say, what? Asphalt roadways, how can that be nature? Well, it's all made up of the same matter the universe is made up of. So there's a middle ground for biophilic design, this idea that nature is living organisms and non-living components of an ecosystem. So it's inclusive of everything from the sun and moon in your watershed to managed forests and urban rain gardens to Nevo's fishbowl and to you. So the 14 patterns of biophilic design were created out of a very broad group of people that design and develop the built environment, scientists, designers, architects, thinkers in this world. And they came up with something that's based about 20 years of what they call evidence-based design. So we have all this billions of years of R&D in nature and how we've interacted with building shelters and living with nature. And they've come up with, in our last 100 years in the world of industry and buildings with air conditioning and big structures, 20, 30 feet of stories. And they created this pattern. And there's 3 major headings. There's nature in the space. So this would be direct, physical, and ephemeral presence of nature in a place. That's simply put saying, can we bring water into a building? Can we bring sun and light? How do we capture the things that are free on the site and allow them to come in? I tell people, often we talk about nature as something that we need to conserve and we need to protect. But what if we looked at, instead of our environmental footprint, we looked at our natural footprint? How much of nature are we allowing into our buildings? Natural analogs. This includes sequences, objects, and patterns that evoke nature indirectly. So that could be something as simple as an artwork that evokes a tree, or something that is a sculpture over your cubicle that shades you from glare from the window that might look like a big leaf. Something that kind of inspires nature, emulates it, like biomimicry. And then nature of the space is a much more abstract spatial concept. It's about the configurations in a place that respond to our innate and learned biological needs and desires to our inner nature. Imagine you go to a restaurant, you walk in, what's the table you want? Do you want the table in the middle of the room with your back to the door where people are walking in, or do you go grab the booth with your back to the wall, knowing that you can see all that's going on and you're protected from the back? That's refuge. So that is one of the natures of the space. And there's a lot that we could talk about across each of these 3 categories. What I'm going to do is do a brief kind of overview of them, and then we're going to dive into nature of the space, because I think it's kind of so neat and interesting and subjective that it's something that you could take back to you in your homes, in your work environment, and think about how you might create more of those opportunities. So I show this to say that when we think about biophilic design and all these patterns that I'm about to describe to you, what's the most important thing to think about is this idea of what we were talking about earlier, the relationships in nature. So all these people on a bike are pedaling individually. They're all maybe in those different silos: energy, water. They're focused on the site. Maybe it's a landscape architect, or it's somebody over in the behavior on the facility side, or just at your house, somebody who cares more about the relationships, the person, the mom or the dad, or the parent at the school, or a teacher. So nature and collaboration, it's about saying, okay, we're each coming from our vantage points, but if we're pedaling individually, what if we're all aiming in the same direction? So something to keep in the back of your mind and as a takeaway, and it's not really in the 14 patterns of biophilic design, but it's kind of in biomimicry, and it's connected to how you successfully express those patterns, is you've got to realize that the best way that you can move forward in this is continue to collaborate, the stuff we talked about in the breakout activity of biomimicry, to really make sure you're staying close to the people in your community and talking about these things moving forward, because the best ideas are going to come from a diversity of viewpoints. And to continue to know that those relationships can move you forward in the same direction. So I'm going to first talk about nature in the space. And these things have to do with connecting visually and non-visually. It has to do with non-rhythmic sensory stimuli. These are all fancy words. Thermal and airflow variability, presence of water, dynamic and diffuse light, connection with natural systems. If I were just to summarize this, I would say Janine Benyus, one of the founders of Biomimicry, she said, beauty is the signal of the good. When you go into a field and you see something beautiful to you, that means it's safe for you, it's healthy for you, and it will bring you good in your life. We know instinctually when something is harmful, maybe I shouldn't eat that really weird dark red berry. Maybe there's a reason that I can't see further than this field. I should probably stay where I'm at right now. There are instinctual aspects to us. So when we design the built environment, we bring in things that we see in nature that we know to be beautiful, that we are attracted to. It's why we go hiking. It's why we take vacations at the beach. It's why we go outside as much as possible when we can, when the weather allows. It's how do we bring that stimulus and honor and respect the biological innate needs of our body, so that what if the lighting in here changed color range to mimic sunrise to sunset, from the yellow tones to the red tones during the day? That would be an example of dynamic and diffuse light. And then what if our air conditioning systems didn't have just a static in and out of the ventilation, but created variability so you could feel kind of a breeze across you the way you would outside? It's a mimicry, and it's a little bit of shaping our spaces to bring nature inside so that we're stimulating our senses. That's really what this whole list is about. Natural analogs can be really powerful. We have such a visual reality in terms of our health and well-being. There are studies in Japan. It's called Shinrin-yu, and it means basically forest bathing, and they have done medical studies to show that people's heart rates, their stress levels, their blood pressure all evens out when they're in a forest. So imagine if you can't go outside and do that at work, but what if you recreated some of those feelings with natural analogs? Maybe it's artwork, sculpture, color, patterns around you. There's a lot of things that you can do to bring that feeling into a space in your home or at work. And the nature of the space is what I talked about earlier, this idea of prospect, refuge, mystery, risk, and peril. And I'll just go back one to say that with this one, not only biomorphic forms and patterns, but actual material connection with nature. So the difference between walking on wood or ceramic floor or vinyl, there are 3 different feelings, and one might evoke more of the sense of being connected with nature with wood. Complexity and order, we have known, if you look at the cover of movies, like Out of Africa, I'm trying to think of some other examples, there's often a picture of this tree with a certain kind of pattern to it in a big open landscape. And you'll see it a lot when you look out in nature, and we are visually pleased by that pattern. And it's throughout time, throughout Greek and Roman design, all the way up through today, there's a reality and a known geometry that the human eye is pleased by, and we can mimic that complexity and order in the way that we lay out our spaces and what we put around us, and honor that. So diving into the patterns of prospect, refuge, mystery, risk, and peril, I would say, this is a water garden park in Fort Worth, Texas, and in California we'd never get away with this because we'd have to have railings over the whole thing. And you'd think, why would I ever want risk or peril in my building? Well, I'm going to go into that in more detail, but basically there are aspects to our beingness that are more attractive to us by knowing that we have the feeling not just of the refuge in the restaurant and the booth where you've got your back to the wall, but why you like to go out to a mezzanine, to the rail, and look down to the open space below, this idea of a big vista that you can look out at, or a mystery, this idea of not knowing quite what's around the corner and the excitement of that, and then risk and peril of not quite being unsafe, but knowing that there's a little risk in what's about to happen can be kind of exciting for us in spaces and evoke in schools and different spaces healing and well-being. So prospect and this unimpeded view over a distance for surveillance and planning. This is a wonderful thing. It gives us a sense of control and of being, knowing where we're at and knowing what's before us. And it kind of gives us something bigger than who we are. And if you can't do that in your house or work, you can talk about, like, where can I go to get that during the day? And then refuge, I talked a little bit about that example. This is a seating alcove on the Henderson Bridge in Singapore. But what if you were in a situation where you're in an urban environment, lots of people, but you could just pull to the side and you could kind of seek refuge even in an urban trafficked area. And then mystery, not quite knowing what's around the corner. This is the Lawse Chinese Garden in Portland, Oregon. But as you're moving through, that really, all of these patterns are about saying, if this is something that we get in the natural world, how can we recreate it in our built world? What if we design spaces to take into account these types of patterns? It would be not just an accidental once in a while thing in a garden or in an alcove fridge, but we would create a whole bunch of options, a diversity of options for people and buildings. And then the risk peril, this is an example from New York. It is the Highline Park. They call it the People Aquarium. And what it is you're literally in bleachers and there's traffic rushing underneath you. So you have this sense of being safe and protected, but it's kind of a little exciting to have speeding traffic right underneath your feet and hearing the sound and feeling the air of that. And these kinds of ways that we can create spaces engages the senses. It gives a sense of honoring the body and the biology, and that we are naturally and instinctively needing stimulus and diversity of types of spaces that allow us to feel a diverse experience during the day, because there's a reason you have more energy and less energy. There's different variations about being in the rhythm of the day. So we're going to break out into an activity, and what I'd like to do is pair up in groups, and if you don't mind pairing up with new people just to get a sense of maybe meeting somebody new here today, little variability and sensory input difference and diversity. And what I want you all to do is think about, what is your favorite place to go? And it's usually the first thing that you think of that you don't have to think very hard about. And I want you to get together with somebody next to you, and it can be inside or outside, and share that favorite place and why it's your favorite place. Thinking about some of the patterns that I just described to you and how your senses are engaged or not. Maybe it's a quiet place where you don't have a lot of sensory input. So if you would just take a few minutes to think about that and share. And for those that are online, if you are able to just sort of do some self-reflection on your favorite place, we'll have a chance to share some of that afterwards. So I am curious. I know that, it's just a short amount of time, but we have another activity coming up. I want to make space for both. If maybe a few people want to share what, their favorite place was, or if it was inside or outside, if there's anybody who wants to. And there's a chat box on Twitter and hashtag SLPS Thursday. You can type in your responses as well if you're online. My Twitter handle is at LilyLivingston1. If you want to also tag me, or at Daniel Lawse. So does anybody here want to share their favorite place?
My favorite place is my front porch, and so it gives me a feeling of almost being inside and outside. I decorated it where I put big outdoor curtains on both sides, so it feels kind of private. But I live on a corner lot in Dundee, and so I have real big trees, but I can still see people walking by and dogs. And then I have really comfy furniture and a rug out there. And I have lilac bushes that the snow blows on the front porch when I sit outside.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anyone else?
It would have to be the mountains for me. The singular majesty feeds my soul.
Lovely. What I like in those two examples is you can hear about this idea of engaging the senses and even with smell. There's actually some studies in healthcare looking at aromatherapy and positive scents and positive distractions that help you heal. All right, so the next activity is connected. Now that we've talked about your favorite place.
Can you read the 2 tweets that came through?
Oh, thank you. So we just got online, my favorite place is in a hammock on a beach. Me too. And another one was on river's edge early morning. So what I love about that is when we're thinking about water and the power of water, those of us who love to take a bath, is, there's this sense of something that's soothing and calming and flowing. And also, when you're in a hammock on a beach, you get a sense of that because you've got, the water of the ocean, that expanse next to you, but you're in this lovely, safe, protected time for napping.
We also have a question or a comment on our chat box that says, while seashore and mountains appeal, gardens for those of us in Nebraska are our favorite place. They have mystery, a sense of connection, and are needed by the garden, and we can need the garden.
I don't know if they could hear that. Let me repeat that back. I'll just jump up here and pop off the camera for a second and read. So it says, while seashore and mountains appeal, gardens for those of us in Nebraska are a favorite place. They have mystery, a sense of connection. We are needed by the garden, and we need the garden. What I love about that is it's not only looking at the patterns of the mystery and connecting our senses. It goes back to the biomimicry discussion we had around relationships, and also my multi-seater bike, this idea of meeting in both directions and the power of using that to make good solutions in the world. So really quickly, I want you guys to get to talk now about think quickly, first thing that comes to you, a place you'd really like to change in your world, a place that you kind of hate to go, but you have to go. It's your least favorite place. And describe what it is about it that's not so great and what you might like to change, whether it's inside or outside. And maybe think about some of, and I'm going to pull it up in a second, the patterns, kind of a quick summary. Think about what you might use from the patterns of biophilic design to change that, if you could. You know, money, no object, time, no object. It's just ideals, of course. Talk amongst yourselves, and then we'll share some ideas. And for those online, you can do the same thing, and please feel free to share in the Twitter window, hashtag SLPS Thursday, your least favorite place and what you might like to do to change it. Well, I like one of the ones that popped in on the Twitter feed, a cubicle dark isolating barren. I and many feel your pain. I am in my own cubicle world right now. I would be curious to know from, I don't even know how to pronounce that Twitter tag, PS shy you wish. You wish. I like that. I'd love to know your thoughts on what you'd like to do to improve that. I have some thoughts, but feel free to Twitter about it. And does anybody in this room have something that they want to share about their least favorite place and what they might do? Oh, good.
The doctor's office, and especially, well, in the waiting room's not as bad, but then you get stuck in this cubicle and it's 4 squares and there's nothing to see outside. You never know when they're going to come, and you're twiddling your thumbs, and it needs some greenery, it needs some music, it needs some camaraderie, it needs some entertainment. Just a window to look out of it sure would be nice, but it just drives me nuts. And if they're worried about modesty, you can pull the shade when the doctor's examining you. But and you sit in the doctor's main office and nobody talks to each other.
Can I get your card and bring you with me to my healthcare meetings? Because that's exactly what I'm working on in my professional world to change with these patterns in healthcare. And by the way, I love the comment about bringing in the doctor's office and these exam rooms that have no windows, because there's all these programmatic reasons that they have on one side to justify these decisions, but at the end of the day, it's you and people like you and me that go in and sit there and go, this is cold and sterile. So, the things that they are trying to improve, there are a lot of healthcare systems right now, it should make you happy to know, even though that room still has a problem, is daylighting is a big push in healthcare, and they understand the tensions with privacy, but there are ways to pull shade to get the privacy. or even do it with some creative levels of glass diffusing so that above and below you can have views. So things like that are getting corrected right now. Does anybody else have a least favorite place that they want to share?
We actually have a few in the chat box. One is any windowless room, finding lighting that emulates nature and incorporating other things from nature can help.
Here, I'll read it. So one of them was, any place that has little or no connection with nature is difficult. In a windowless room, finding lighting that emulates nature and incorporating other things from nature can help. In a hospital room, those with views or trees are found to heal faster than those who do not have a view or something natural. Also, freeways, expressways are awful. Well said. And then, let's see if there's anything. Oh, Daniel. See, we've got Daniel's favorite place is the forest. And, okay, great. So I love that there's some good comments coming in about healthcare, and interestingly enough, in the world of healthcare, there's something called evidence-based design, which really, in a way, is all the source material to create these patterns. It's been around for a long time, and they went in with these hypotheses. Wow, what if we had views to nature? Would that help heal faster? Turns out yes. And it's like the medical studies they did in Japan around forest bathing, and some of these other things that are coming to fruition around the world. We now have scientific evidence that can prove what any of us in this room can instinctually tell you, that hey, if you bring nature into a building, you're probably going to be happier, and if you're happier, you're going to heal faster. So in the sense of the healthcare world, it's kind of been a nice diving board into making these changes and creating these patterns. So the big takeaway, if you can think of it this way, is you're all in this room because you have a passion for sustainability or interested in it in some way. And in that way, you are all leaders. I'm a leader, Daniel is, but you all are. And if you can think of it as, we don't need a few, we need thousands of them, and as a bird flocks, and there's simple rules. Think about what are the things that you can take from here and share it with others. How can you learn more? What are things that you can do to affect your space and bring it about? So with that, let's open it up to questions in the room and online. Any questions? And remember, you can use hashtag SLPS Thursday in the Twitter feed.
Any questions coming through the chat box? We threw a lot at you, so.
It is a lot.
Maybe. While we're waiting for questions, I can go ahead and talk about our next presentation. It'll be the last installment of our SLPS program for the 2014-2015 academic year. It will be on Thursday, June 4th. It'll be hosted by the Joslin Institute for Sustainable Communities. Presenter will be Cecil Stewart, who is a world expert on sustainable development and sustainable design. Cecil will be highlighting the 5 domains methodology for assessing sustainability in a given context. Topics will include food, water, energy, land and materials, and how we must consider both conservation and development of those resources to respond effectively to global pressures and to ensure they remain sustainable for future generations. Just FYI, following the June presentation, SLPS will take a summer break and resume in September for the new academic year. So, let's see if we have any questions. No questions from the chat box.
A question in the audience?
I was wondering if you could talk about some places that do a good job of incorporating nature into their inside environment.
In the world of design that I'm in right now, although I've been an architect for a while, I do, in the past 7 or 8 years, been focusing a lot on healthcare, so I'm speaking to it a bit. There's some really great projects out there that are starting to look at bringing nature indoors, atrium spaces that have trees, more plants, more fountains, a lot more daylighting is becoming a huge important topic. The federal government has guiding principles where they basically said, thou shalt do this, and daylighting is one of them. In some of the third-party metrics that are confirming green building solutions, they're not saying we don't just want views, we want quality views. So in terms of some examples, what we could do is maybe send some out in the Twitter feed later. I don't have, I could talk about a ton of them, but there's some really great projects that are coming out that are looking at these issues, actually Google, and others have these moonshot groups or these people that are about innovation, and they are looking at biophilic design in their office spaces. And they're coming up with playing with the idea of creating mystery and refuge and looking out the prospect and those different aspects, as well as some of the others with the variable light, dynamic lighting that changes color during the day. They're installing some of that in their office spaces.
This may be a funny question, but how do you get them to spend money on that?
Yeah. Well, oftentimes it comes down to the organizations themselves taking it on as a priority. Healthcare organizations are starting to see that they'll save money if they treat their human capital better. There's new ways of looking at economy and cost. Natural capital, human capital are now starting to become creatively brought into the cost-benefit analysis that didn't used to exist. We used to think about first costs only, and with some of these sustainability definitions, when we think about future generations, we're doing life cycle analysis looking forward 40 years. What's the payback? Not just now. And so things are staying in play that didn't used to, plus there's also these things looking at creative ways, sustainable return on investment versus just what's your return on investment. Yeah. Not enough of that, but it's starting. And I'm hoping that it'll create great momentum soon.
Also with healthcare, there's quality measures and outcomes now. A big push in healthcare right now too is quality measures and outcomes, where you're not going to get your Medicare and Medicaid funding, especially for our elderly population, if you're not showing quality outcomes and that they're happy as patients. So bringing in some of these ideas would be a huge benefit, so you can get your reimbursement.
Yeah, good point. Besides the analysis side, there's investments, incentives that are starting to come into play from different areas. So we all know policy is powerful. And so if it's like a federal policy or it's a local or state incentive to do certain things, I think that's how we're going to see change, and healthcare is leading the way.
I just want to add too is that we're not, I don't know if this is against what you believe in, but there's a point where we have to speak up and ask for what we want, and that's in a daily basis, doctor to patient, teacher, schools, and I think that's our responsibility as a plant, as nature.
Yeah, I think we're all bees and we need to pollinate some things.
And that goes back to that communication and feedback. The system, whatever size system, the healthcare system or the hospital or your doctor's office, is going to get feedback from the patients, from the people, from the doctors, from the nurses, from the patients. So the more feedback that we can give, the better that system is going to be able to respond. And when you have large, complex systems, it often takes more feedback and consistent feedback over time. But with that, think of water on a rock, erosion. The water beats the rock, even if with just one drip. So I guess to wrap things up, unless there's another question on the chat box or Twitter, I encourage you to think about these life principles that biomimicry gives us, these lessons that life uses to thrive in your own life, and looking at the patterns of biophilic design that Lily shared with us. How can you enhance the spaces that you love, or the spaces that are maybe your least favorite, that you spend more time than you'd like to in, and make those more life-giving spaces, places where you can really enjoy yourself. There's both of these create great lenses for you. And we have a few resources on here on the slideshow. AskNature.org, you can literally go in and type a question. How does nature move? How does nature communicate? And it will help, it'll give you organism-specific examples. And you can start to extrapolate that into your own challenge. And then biomimicry and the 14 patterns of biophilic design. And it looks like we have one more question. Do we have time for one more?
I just want to know, we're sorry for being late. We had the time.
It's on recording.
Hi, I'm Mike, and I probably apologize for being late. I just want to know, what time is this going to be broadcasted? When and where we can catch up on it?
Yeah, we'll have Sarah respond to that because she knows the technical.
And I'll just say one quick thing about the resources is, for those that want to learn more, there's free resources. You can get this report for free on biophilic design online and print it off PDF. So all of this information is available if you'd like to dive in deeper.
So with that, we'd like to thank Daniel and Lily. Thank you so much for their thought-provoking And to answer Mike's question, for those of you that couldn't attend, we are always streaming live. If you have access to a computer, if you don't have the ability to get to a specific location, and if you, for whatever reason, can't attend either live or on site, most of the presentations will be up on YouTube generally within a week. And you can check our campus website, you can check Twitter, we promote it everywhere, so it'll be on YouTube. So thank you guys so much again, really appreciate having you.
Thank you all for coming.